Hello, I'm Zainab Badawi from BBC World News, and Global News is delighted to be at the virtual World Travel Market. And this year, of course, we've not had to travel further than the comfort of our own sitting rooms. And it's my great pleasure to be hosting this UNWTO, WTTC and WTM Ministers Summit. Now, this is really going to provide us with a fascinating discussion because we are bringing together key players from the public sector and the private sector to see just how they are trying to coordinate their efforts with the 3 R's to respond, to recover and to rebuild the travel and tourism industry in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're going to be having some keynote speakers as well as a couple of very panel discussions to see whether the industry has been transformed, if so, how, and is it forever, and just what kind of responses are needed, what may change, what may not just turn out to be, a phenomenon. So, and the role of technology and sustainability is very, very important in how we tackle the COVID-19 pandemic and the implications for the travel and tourism industry. And just in case you needed reminding, which you probably don't, this is a terrifically important industry. It accounts for 330 million jobs worldwide directly and millions more indirectly. That's 1 in 10 jobs worldwide. And it accounts for $9 trillion of global GDP. So such an important sector for us to be discussing and to try to make sure that it gets back on its feet. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our first keynote speaker, and that's Simon Press, who is the Senior Exhibition Director at WTM. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zainab. Ministers, travel leaders, and distinguished guests, a very warm welcome to the very first WTM Virtual and the 14th WTM Ministers Summit in association with the United Nations World Tourism Organization and World Tourism Council. Need I say that this year has been the toughest year for the travel industry. The outbreak of COVID-19 has impacted countries and companies at different times and in different ways and in varying degrees. Given the scale of the challenge facing tourism for the first time in its history, UNWTO and WTM London are partnering with World Travel and Tourism Council, which represents the global travel and tourism private sector for the virtual event, making it the UNWTO, WTTC and WTM Ministers Summit. I'm very proud to say that together UNWTO, WTTC and WTM London created a manifesto, a set of ideas and a plan of actions created to influence key global travel players, policies and governments in the next decade for a safer, greener and smarter travel and tourism. Over the last few weeks, our team have interviewed ministers, leaders, entrepreneurs and experts who shared their experiences and plans for exploring the best ways to recover, rebuild and accelerate the global travel industry. I'm delighted to share that our very first virtual summit will discuss all of this further. Some of the outcomes of the manifesto will give the opportunity for the best travel experts in the world to share their plans for recovery in the post-pandemic world. Some of the high-level findings to look forward to are strategies around globally aligned travel restrictions, how these strategies are being closely aligned with global health and safety protocols, a call on governments to support targeted at the travel tourism sector, covering all industries within the ecosystem. And finally, the pandemic is generally seen as a reset, providing overall positive effect on sector sustainability. A majority expect that they will focus in the coming years. However, 2 to 3 also fear that immediate investment will be postponed due to the current crisis. This virtual summit will also offer a unique open forum to discuss crucial challenges facing our industry, and it enables decision makers and investors to drive change and improvements. We start with a discussion on leading the way to recovery, rebuilding confidence, ensuring travelers feel safe and in control, and the globally aligned approach to risk assessment and travel restrictions. Thank you all again for your attendance and continued support. I would now like to hand Zainab.
Thank Thank you very much indeed there, Simon, and adding another R, which is reset, of course, which is kind of the rebuilding idea about pressing the reset button so we build back better, something that we're hearing a great deal about here. So our next speaker is Gloria Guevara. Now, Gloria joined WTTC in 2017, and she's CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council. But Gloria brings a whole, host of experience to this role, because she worked in both the public and private sector in tourism and travel. She was tourism in her native Mexico. And Gloria, at that time, you were very much recognized the role of travel and tourism as a vehicle for job creation, economic growth and development. So we're all ears to hear what you have to say. Gloria Guevara, thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. What a pleasure to be part of this. Thank you for the invitation, and an honor to join this organization. Simon has been instrumental, WTM, to help us to organize this with UNWTO. I want to also acknowledge the governments that are joining us. Oliver Dowding from Secretary of State for the UK, very important, the role of the UK. We have been working very closely also with our friend Nigel Holston. And then some secretaries and ministers that are joining us from Philippines, Jordan, Greece, Costa Rica, and many other, all excellencies. Thank you for joining this historic event. As we all know, we're living unprecedented situation. I'm also glad to see some of our members from TUI, Intrepid, Radisson, and many others. As it was mentioned, the public and private collaboration is critical to recover. We not only have reset the tone of our sector, but it's very important to bring back the millions of jobs impact. As she mentioned already, 1 in 10 jobs depend on our sector. And it is very important, we believe at WTTC, to learn from the past, and very important to resume international travel. So far, 143 million jobs have been impacted, $3.8 trillion globally. And unfortunately, this number can increase by the end of the year to 174 million jobs. On October 7, we had a historic meeting with the UK, of course, was part of that, and many other governments around the world. The G20 tourism minister, whereby per request of the Saudi Arabia chaired government for the G20 this year, we put forward a plan to recover 100 million jobs. Very important, this plan, as is going to help us to resume international travel. This plan is centered in a couple of things. Coordination is crucial, not only public and private, but also international, to resume travel. Tech and contact tracing, we believe, is the solution if we learn from the past, so that we can have a safe, seamless travel experience and isolate the people infected in this situation. Health protocols are also crucial, as we are in the process of rebuilding trust from the travelers. We need to make sure that the experience is the same around the world, and a hotel in London is offering the same experience that a hotel in Madrid, in Philippines, New York, or whatever is the country. It's a harmonized approach and experience to guarantee that we are doing everything possible to reduce any spread of the virus. Also, the importance of the continue having the support from the governments. We have seen examples, such as the case of the UK, and many governments around the world, in Europe, Philippines, Costa Rica, and others, that have done a wonderful job supporting our. And last but not least, we need to consider the social impact of our sector, because of, yes, we are suffering a health pandemic, a health crisis that has become an economical crisis, but it's also become a social crisis. 54% were women that work in our sector, 30% youth, and the social impact has been unfortunately devastated. Events like these are going to help us to coordinate better, to help us to make the right decisions, because it is up to us if we recover in 18 months or 3 to 4 years, depending on the action we make, the decisions that we take, and how we can work together. We will be able to recover faster, or it will be like in the past situations like 9/11, that it will take us longer. Again, we believe that working together, we can overcome this important crisis. I'm delighted to see so many friends be part of these discussions. And thanks again for the partnership and working together to bring back the millions of livelihoods impacted. Back to you.
Thank you so much indeed, Gloria Guevara, and making some very interesting points there about, what started off, of course, as a health crisis has also become a social, economic, and at times even political crisis. And I'm very struck by what Larry Summers, who was economic advisor to Barack Obama, said, that actually the magnitude of what we're going through now is far greater recovery after 9/11 and even the world wars. So make no mistake about the severity of the crisis we are dealing with. So with that thought, let me invite Oliver Dowden, the Secretary of State for the United Kingdom in DCMS, Digital Culture, Media and Sport Department. So Oliver Dowden, it'd be very interesting to hear your opening remarks and reflection, and perhaps just pick up on what your colleague Gloria Guevara has said there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Zainab, and welcome everyone to the World Travel Market. As always, the UK is really proud to be hosting this event, even if sadly this year I can't have the honour of welcoming you all to London. And as you all know, for 40 years, this event has been a great opportunity to come together and celebrate the very best of the tourism industry. But of course, this year, we come together in very different and very difficult circumstances. And as Zainab and others have already said, coronavirus has pummeled every industry, but perhaps none more so than this sector. Tourism exists to open doors to new places, and sadly, the coronavirus has slammed those doors shut. It has grounded planes, stopped trains, and kept ferries in their places. So this year's event has an extremely important purpose: to bring us all together to find a way to regroup, to recover, and hopefully to start to rebuild. In mind, the United Kingdom government has launched a global travel task force to consider what steps we can all take, whether that is domestically or around the world, to enable us to have that safe and sustainable recovery in international travel. Now, the good news for tourism is that actually, as you will all know, there is a huge amount of pent-up demand, which has been building daily since the pandemic hit. Put simply, everyone wants to go on holiday, but they can't. And those millions of people who are forced to delay their holidays this year will be more eager than ever to travel in 2021 and the years beyond. And I want to say to all those future tourists and all those businesses here today, I want you to know that the United Kingdom remains open. Our doors are wide open for visitors. And you really could do no better than coming to visit our wonderful United Kingdom. And I say this as someone who's enjoyed many holidays in the UK, everywhere from Cornwall as a child to the Lake District, Northumbria, Dorset, Wales, the west coast of Scotland. We have wonderful world-class attractions to come and visit. And there really is nothing quite like a great British break. And of course, not only that, but because we're home to so many creative industries, you often find yourself walking through a film set, whether that's visiting Durham Cathedral, where Harry Potter was filmed, or the streets of Edinburgh, where Ian Rankin novels were written. And of course, in 2022, it'll be more exciting than ever to visit the United Kingdom, because in that great year, perhaps if this year has been a very, very challenging year, hopefully 2021 will be a year of recovery. For the United Kingdom, we're hoping that 2022 will be a year of celebration. We'll be welcoming the world to the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, West Midlands. We'll be having a festival of the United Kingdom in 2022, bringing all parts of our nation together. And in 2022, Her Majesty the Queen will be celebrating 70 years on the throne, a year of celebration for her Platinum Jubilee. So it'd be a wonderful opportunity for the United Kingdom to come together and to show our very best to the rest of Britain and the rest of the world. So I look forward to seeing you there in 2022, not before. But in the meantime, I really hope all of you enjoy this very important event and make the most of the opportunity to get together and to discuss how we can all rebuild a safer, smarter, and indeed green sector for the future. Thank you, and back over to you, Zainab.
Thank you so much indeed, Secretary of State. And indeed, yes, the safer, smarter, greener travel and tourism industry is, I think, very much the mantra and what everybody is hoping to be able to do to reset that button. So that's now what we're going to be doing. We're going to be discussing just the hows, what can be done and what works, what's being done that's good, where are the gaps and so on. And to do that, we're rejoined by Gloria Guevara, but we also have Harry Theoharis, who's the Minister of Tourism for Greece. And of course, Greece is a country that relies hugely on tourism. Hello to you, Minister. Also, Bernadette Romulo-Priat, who's the Secretary, or in other words, Ministry of Tourism. Hello, and also Naif Al-Fayyaz, who is the Minister of Tourism for Jordan. And Naif, I hope you are there and your camera is back on, which is terrific. Ahlan wa sahlan, assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Minister. And perhaps, Minister, you could just ask one of your colleagues to adjust the camera so that there is slightly less headroom and we can see a bit more of you. That would be great. And also we have Thomas Ellerbeck, who is the member of the Group Executive Committee of the TUI Group, which of course is a group that's known to so many of the major players in the travel and tourism industry. So hello to all of you, wonderful panel. Let me just start off with a quick fire question so that we can all hear what you have to say. We know that it's bad, we've heard that and why, but I just want to ask you very quickly, what do you think is the biggest obstacle that needs to be overcome? Is it a lack of traveller confidence? Is it the lack of investment to rebuild better? Just to give us an idea. Gloria, to you.
I think the biggest challenge that we face, at least from the private sector, is the international coordination, to tell you the truth. Some countries are doing better than others, but there's not enough sharing best practices. And travel is international. This ecosystem is connected. So it's very important to have this international coordination and at the same time, try to move for only containing the spread to containing the spread and to learn to coexist with this virus, because this virus is going to be here for some time. So we need to be able to learn from the past and cover those two in a most effective way so that we can resume travel in a safe way and bring back those jobs and livelihoods.
All right, so perhaps a shift in mindset that this virus is here to stay. You think that's perhaps the biggest obstacle?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Harry Theoharis in Greece, what do you think is the biggest obstacle that really needs overcoming?
Yes, well, we've seen this pandemic develop, and as a result, we've seen a lot of changes in the attitudes of people. So in the first instance, we had fear. That was the biggest obstacle. Everybody had to cocoon and, the lockdowns, etc. We managed to reopen, albeit with fragmentation. That's now the biggest problem. We have a lot of confusion, a lot of different rules. There's no coordination. Gloria said this before. So one would have thought that perhaps demand is not there, but we've seen a lot of pent-up demand. So that's not the problem. Mainly the confusion is a problem. So we need to now move in the next year, at least until we wait for a vaccine or some other resolution that can return us to normality. We need a recovery with less restrictions. So we need to now coordinate, talk to each other, and remove the restrictions in favor of perhaps more rapid testing or other tools that will allow more harmonization for the traveling and tourism industry.
All right, okay, Minister Bernadette Romulo-Priat. So you've heard a couple of things mentioned there as big obstacles, overcoming that mindset of fear, and then also Harry Theoharis saying that a lack of coordination is the big obstacle. Okay.
Yes, aside from what Gloria and Minister Theoharis mentioned, it's the higher travel cost because you have to factor in higher insurance premiums and additional cost of COVID test before travel. Another big challenge would be the 14-day quarantine. Though in the Philippines, you can come here as long as you test negative, you don't need to quarantine for 14 days, but when they come back to their country, they have to quarantine. So that people might not want to travel if when they come home, they have to do a 14-day quarantine.
Okay, all right. So Minister Naif Al-Fayyaz there in Amman, Jordan. It sounds like the public sector has got to do a better job of coordinating, the quarantines, what kind of restrictions, that there's a great deal of confusion there. Is that what do you see as the biggest obstacle?
I'll be very frank with you. I think today the biggest obstacle is how do we keep that sector alive and how united so that we can overcome this short time, because we all know that tourism is going to be coming back strong. It's a matter of time. It's a matter where we find the vaccine, where we overcome a lot of obstacles. But meanwhile, I agree with my colleagues. There has to be more coordination across the line between all, so that we have spoken before as a tourism sector on united issues and also on procedures, so that when we talk to the private sector or to the government, it is a unified language that we speak in general globally. The problem is that practices that you see, it's different from one country to another. And sometimes if you like to give the example of one country, the other examples of many other countries are given and saying, look at the number of cases that have risen in certain countries. So I think that coordination is a must for all of us.
All right, Thomas Ellerbeck, you're the only member of the private sector in this panel. So are you all confused by what the restrictions are, the quarantines and all the rest of it? Are you going around scratching your heads?
I think it would be less a problem than only I would be confused. I believe customers, the guests, they are confused. That's, I would say, the biggest obstacle in the room, that we have to give back confidence to the customers about the framework, how we handle the virus. When you ask me, well, the best effort would be to find a vaccine and medicaments, but we have to learn to live with the virus, as Minister Theoharis just said before. I think we made a lot of learnings this year, and I saw also a lot of collaboration between the private sector and government. So I would always say, when you look to Europe, Greece was a blueprint, and I do not say this only because Harry is in the call here. We worked very intensively from the beginning, when the crisis started in, well, let's say March, April, May. We talked about the restart, and we talked about how we can we get standards, hygienic standards, etc., that travelers can go back. And I would say Greece has delivered very, very well this year. Also Balearics, Spain, that's all worked on getting the right measures. But at the end, the cases have increased over the last weeks, and now we have so many different regulations in Europe. And I could also say, as a German, in Germany, so we have 16 states with different regulations, and this means at some point people are confused about how the travel can be in the future.
All right.
Thank you.
Very clear message then from all of you. So Thomas, you're saying there that this confusion is leading to a lack of confidence, and you're picking out Harry Theoharis there in Greece. And of course, we know Greece relies for tourism is about 20% of your GDP, absolutely critical. So what have you done then that is right? We've heard about these traffic light systems, red, green, amber in Europe. We've heard about, the Baltic having their travel bubbles. Is there not enough coordination at the regional level, and can nations go it alone?
A lot of the countries, you have to imagine how difficult it is to coordinate. Even in Europe, we have the European Union, which has known methods to try to find a consensus and coordinate. Just imagine other regions that have to do bilaterals and agreements, which is very, very difficult. What we did some things that are very similar to other countries, like the health protocols, ensuring that we train all the employees, ensuring that everything is adhered to and the standards are up to scratch. So we did a lot of common things, and many countries did. Perhaps the single thing that we tried to do differently and was at the forefront was a machine learning and artificial intelligence system that we installed at the borders with a passenger locator form, which was only online and allowed us to increase the effectiveness of our testing by up to 4 times and 2.5 times on average. This gave us a advance warning of the way the situation that other countries was going, up to 2 weeks before the headline. So we were proactive in instituting those controls. That was a very, the way that we handled the border auditing. And the second thing that we did was to ensure that we have a full transparency mode. So we did not hide any cases. We did not, we adhere to all the standards, because that's the only way to build the kind of trust with your partners and with the citizens that you're actually, pursuing their health as a first priority.
Okay, let me ask the other ministers, Naif Al-Fayyaz and also Bernadette Romulo-Pouillet. Can that approach work? I mean, do you need, when you said there's a lack of coordination, can countries do what Greece said and go it alone? Or do you need regional coordination or global coordination? And I'll come back to you on that, Gloria, because we've seen the WTTC's safe travels, global health and safety standards, and the global safety stamp, but it doesn't seem to have done the trick. So let me ask you, Naif and Bernadette.
Well, as we see it in Jordan, for example, Jordan has taken very strict measures at the beginning. So we locked the country for a while and we tried to protect ourselves from anyone coming in. And then we opened the borders again. And all of a sudden, all the cases similar to many other countries started to rise in large numbers. So without that confidence for the traveler that he is going to be safe, he's not going to be traveling. So I think the restrictions, and there has to be a balance between the health and the tourism industry, because if you look only in terms of health without understanding how you can bring people in, with having them checked before arriving to the country. And we have done, Jordan, we have done certain procedure because we opened our borders, we opened our airports, and people can come to Jordan. We're still challenged today with the 2 weeks quarantine or 1 week quarantine. No tourist would like to come to Jordan and stay for a week quarantine. Now, whenever we present our case in front of other ministers or we present it to our colleagues, the challenge is, okay, how do we keep tourists safe and Jordanians safe and the country safe? So this is where I say the coordination between countries, maybe through our respected organizations, we can coordinate, take the best practices and show what other countries have done. Even if we have succeeded in opening the borders, I'm sure certain cases are going to be coming back again. But how do we deal with them? And how do we control the numbers and the procedures that has to be taken? I don't think that one country alone can do it. I think we should learn from each other because we don't have the luxury of time today. The time is moving so quick. And I think that coordination will help all of us as a tourism industry be ready in the meanwhile. And then once the vaccine is back or out, then I'm sure the issue will be much easier.
All right, okay. And I say to all the participants who are listening, please send in your questions as well. I have got a chat function, and so I can see what's coming in and think about what you'd like to ask our panelists as you hear them speak. So Bernadette, your response there, I mean, you've got Jordan there saying, yes, can learn from Jordan, a population of about 6.5 million. Greece is about 11 million. Philippines, you're a huge country, 104 million or thereabouts, lots of islands. So is there a kind of one size fits all approach that you think there are examples of best practice that countries?
Well, first the Philippine government received the Safe Travel Stamp last September 18, and we were the 100th country to receive that. It just shows that our health and safety protocols are at par with all over the world. The Philippines we've been open to domestic tourism. Boracay was open to, we had a travel bubble around the island of Boracay. Of course, Boracay, everybody knows Boracay. It's been successful, and we opened up Boracay last October 1 to the whole country. So far, as of today, we've had 0 COVID cases. It's really just test before travel, RT-PCR, no quarantine when you arrive in Boracay. We've been successfully also been able to open up all the other tourist destinations in Palawan. It's been open since June, 0 COVID cases. So we think that we can slowly do this travel bubbles, which we've been doing around the country, and we can do it maybe short haul around Asia, Southeast Asia first, and the whole of Asia. Right. But I think what also helps is that we adhere to the health and safety protocols that the WTTC also follows.
All right, okay. Let me ask you then, Gloria, I mean, we've heard about these safe travels, global health and safety standards and the global safety stamp, but they don't seem to have overcome this obstacle that you're all talking about a lack of coordination, consumer confusion, and therefore lack of confidence. So what's going wrong?
I think we need to understand that we have multiple challenges here. One is to rebuild the trust from the traveler, and another one is to remove the travel barriers, for instance. We need to make sure that we also learn from the past. 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis are the two crises that have impacted the most our sector. The difference is that in 2008, we had very good public and private coordination and international coordination that we recovered in 18 months. The other one, it took us 3 to 4 years because of the lack of not ideal international coordination and also not public and private collaboration ideally. And at the same time, the lack of protocols. When I'm talking about protocols, those impact the experience of the traveler. Even 19 years after 9/11, before COVID, when you were traveling around the world in the airports, as an example, the screening at airports was different, right? In some places, they were asking you to remove shoes. In some places, they don't. Those are protocols for safety, as an example. So we at WTTC, in order to rebuild trust from the traveler, we took a stand and say, let's define those international protocols for the hotels, for the MICE, for the tours, work with, for instance, ICAO and IATA and ACI for the airlines, for the airports. And let's make sure that the experience for the traveler is the standard, is the same. Our hotels offer the rooms, as an example, to doctors and nurses in the middle of the worst of the pandemic. And we were able to maintain those premises, those installations COVID-free. So that went to the creation of the protocols. Now, it is very important to say, like Philippines. Philippines has a certification process in place. They define the protocols according to the health officials. What we gave to Philippines is a recognition that the protocols are at the same level than the global private sector. That's the Safe Travel Stamp. The Safe Travel Stamp is not a certification. It is a recognition that the protocols are at the highest level according to the private sector. And you as a traveler, if you travel to Manila or you stay in a hotel in London or New York, the experience is going to be the same. And that is going to help us to rebuild trust from the travelers. So in our view,
it's not kicked in yet, has it?
It's not enough, because that helps to rebuild trust from the traveler, but you need to remove the barriers, as the minister and Bernadette mentioned, right? If we have the quarantines, of course, it's more complicated. Greece has great protocols. I was, by the way, with my family, and they had great protocols implemented. But if we have the quarantines, it's more complicated.
Let's hear what Thomas has to say. So, Thomas, what do you want to say? And talk directly to the ministers. You've got them there, captive audience. From the private sector's point of view, are you involved sufficiently in working out what these new safety protocols are? Are you finding it difficult as a travel company to, navigate all these different rules and fast-moving changes and all the rest of it?
So I don't want to disappoint you, because I would say the interaction with these ministers here in the room, these are the destinations, is very strong. And I think we learn from each other. And just when Minister Terharis mentioned the KPI-based protocol by arrival, I can say at the beginning, there has been a little bit critics from TUI, but well, at the end, we can say it was successful. And this is something I think talking about having this discussion also, as Gloria has mentioned, I think the WTTC has done a great job, because you brought all the people together to discuss, the industry and the ministers. I think we have to do a little bit more all in the source markets, because the source markets, also the European source markets, probably they have all the problems with increasing numbers in their states, like Germany, like the UK. And I think they don't want to send the wrong messages to their people when they say there will be restrictions at home, but feel safe, feel well to travel. And that's a little bit where we have to increase our approach. And I would say also Southern Europe, especially when we look on Europe, the Southern European states, which depend a lot on tourism, can use their influence in the European Union and also in the G20, etc. I would really lobby that we should focus more on this anti-rapid test, this rapid test is antigen test instead of this PCR test, because in the past 6 months there was a lot of focus on the PCR test, but you know, you need a lot of capacity, a lot of analytics and so on. The antigen tests, the rapid tests are really safe. They're good. They have developed over the last, I would say, 2-3 months. And with a testing strategy, probably also a double testing strategy before arrival and before departure, I think we can do much more because the sector is healthy, the demand is there, people want to travel. It's a fantastic industry, and we have seen this over in the summer. Whenever a country has opened, people started to travel. I think for us it was first with Greece and the Balearics, but other we have to work on how we can make it possible. That's the important topic for the industry and for governments.
Okay, Harry Theo-Harris, Thomas there has mentioned the PCR test and the gene test, and a lot of travellers are so confused. To get on this particular airline, they have to have the PCR test. To get into the country, it's a different test. And people are being turned away at airports, not being allowed to board airlines, and they bought their ticket because there is just confusion about, yes, test, but which test? And until you all sort that out, you're not going to regain consumer confidence.
You're absolutely right, and Thomas as well is very good of him mentioning that, because the antigen test has two crucial characteristics that are different from the PCR test. One is the speed. Up to 15 minutes you can get your result maximum. In many cases only 3 to 5 minutes are enough. The second is cost. It's much less of a barrier for people to travel. Actually, the industry, the customer, can take over that cost. That's why I personally took the initiative on all three fora internally in our government, at the European Union, together with the UNWTO. We recently traveled to Brussels to lobby for use of that test and had extensive discussions with the Commission and the Parliament and the Council in order to ensure that we implement those fast, rapid tests into our thinking. And as well, we introduced an initiative in WTO to create a technical team together with IATA, together with WHO and with ACI, to ensure that we explore the modalities, the practicalities of implementing this as a means of safe travel. So this is the way forward, in my view. This is the way to replace bans and quarantines with rapid testing, and of course, a ban which will only apply to people that test positive, and the quarantine will only apply to people testing positive. So we are some weeks or months away from that, but we are in the pilot phase, Zainab. So many countries and many airports are beginning to do pilots, and I'm very hopeful that next year we will have new regimes in terms of traveling, which will allow those restrictions to be lifted.
So Minister Naif Al-Fayaz, Harry Theo-Harris says next year he hopes that you'll see results in this, but you kind of get the sense that the travel and tourism industry is hemorrhaging billions, hemorrhaging millions of jobs, and you're all struggling to keep up with the rapidity of the changes and not having the necessary responses in place fast enough. You get 5 million visitors per year on average, I think, to your wonderful stone ruins in Petra. You're getting just a trickle compared to that.
Well, actually, we went more than 80% below last year so far. So that's a big number. And as I said in the beginning, it is our biggest challenge. How do we keep the industry up and running? Because there are a lot of jobs that have been invested in this industry, and we have created a lot of opportunities for local people in different, especially empowering women and youth. So to look at keeping all this up and running, so we cannot wait until be honest with you. I'm struggling here, and I just took office again recently, only less than a month ago. So I'm struggling now to find ways to make sure, how do we start bringing people back in as soon as possible? I know that the protocol is there. I mean, our protocol is there, but I just took notes from my colleagues as we were just hearing from them. Now we follow the PCR test, But I'm you know, it's good to hear from my colleagues that the rapid test is something that is must for travelers. Why do we want to keep asking for PCR tests if we have other alternatives when they are more effective, faster, and cheaper? So this is where I'm talking about the taking ideas and exchanging thoughts between different entities and bodies so that we see what works faster. We are well aware that tourism is not going to come as strong as it was last year all of a sudden, but we have to start bringing people back. I know Greece and Philippines have done a great job, and we're looking at the cases of Greece and Philippines to see how we can also start implementing. We have what we call our triangle, which is Petra, Aqaba, and Wadi Rum, where we would like to have what we call it a safe zone, but a bubble zone where we can bring in tourists. So tourists have to feel safe, and also we have to make sure that the country stays in control of the pandemic that is happening.
Right, thank you. We're getting questions in, which is great. Keep them coming. So I'm going to start doing some rapid fire ones. Bernadette, Romulo, Puye, I don't know, you might want to pick up on the PCR test and the need for a quick response test. But I also want to put this question to you that we've got in, because I know that your tourism industry in the Philippines is working very much to engage people in the countryside by farmers, indigenous peoples, women and other marginalized groups. And you mentioned that. So there's a question which I'll give to you, which is, do you think the recovery after COVID-19 should be based on sustainable development, the eradication of poverty and empowerment of local communities? So maybe answer that, but you might want to just give us a quick response. PCR test.
Well, previously, I agree with the RT-PCR test. It's quite expensive. So the Philippine Department of Tourism has actually been pilot testing together with the WHO antigen testing. And we've asked if we could also pilot test saliva testing, because we're always looking for more affordable ways, because the RT-PCR, it's quite expensive, although our president already imposed a price cap. So that's what we're doing with regard to testing. With regard to sustainability, the Philippines has always been into sustainable tourism. As example was, we closed Boracay for six months. And we've always made sure that our, not only our tourism was sustainable, but it was inclusive, that it helps the farmers, it helps the indigenous people, and it helps the poorest of the poor. So we are just mainly continuing with what we've been implementing in the past.
Right, okay. And a question there, realistically, how long do you think it would take for international travel to return to sustainable levels?
I'm sorry. It's very hard to say. I'm not sure if my colleagues can be able to even give a timeline. But what we are doing now is at least domestic tourism has started in the Philippines. It was quite hard for us to start it because some of the communities just didn't want tourists because they were afraid that they would get COVID. But thankfully that our tourist destinations are now all opening because we've been successful.
All right.
So it's very hard to give a timeline. I don't know if my colleagues can give a timeline.
Who wants to jump in if you want to give a timeline to that question? How long do you think it would take for international travel to return to sustainable levels? There's also
like to point out, Zainab, I would like to point out the interesting use of sustainable. Now, sustainable levels is about actually growth and increasing the levels. About a year ago, sustainability would be about managing them in terms of controlling them to go down. So, but we must say that the yardstick of the research talks about 2024 being the same as 2019. Of course, we're all striving here to close that gap and bring things forward.
Okay, all right.
If I may, Zainab, I mean, we're all waiting for the vaccine. I mean, once the vaccine is out, then things will be more clear. The problem is it's not people, they don't want to travel to Greece or Philippines or Jordan. People want to travel. And actually, they're more eager to travel today than before because they've been under lockdown in their countries for a long time. So I think travel will come back quickly once we have vaccine and people feel more safe that they can travel today. I know some people are willing to travel during these times, but a majority of others are still hesitant to travel while it's not clear if they are safe, although some protocols are in place, as my colleagues have mentioned in their countries.
Gloria Guevara, if you in there, and also a question that you could also answer if you could. How reliable is the antigen test? This has been the fear of most governments tackling COVID-19 and the reason for referring the PCR test. So if you could answer that, but also pick up on the point that the Minister
the time frame
about the vaccine. Is that the silver bullet that you're all waiting for, the vaccine?
No, we cannot wait for the vaccine. We need to learn from the past. And we were able to travel during the SARS, MERS, Ebola without a vaccine. We didn't have to wait for that. And even in some cases, there is no vaccine yet because we were able to isolate infected people. So let me just answer really quick 2 questions. The antigen test is the solution in our mind because it's as the ministers already say, it's low cost, it's efficient. What's important here, and I think Thomas mentioned that as well, is the international testing protocol. So if a test is performed in a country of departure where it should be so that we can avoid exporting the virus, then the country that I'm traveling to should accept that results. And the other thing that we are proposing in WTTC, because it's part of our plan, we need to have an international testing protocol. And for that, you need to have international coordination. And we believe that it could be risk assessed. If you're traveling from a low-risk country to a high-risk country, you don't need tests on departure. But from a high-risk or medium-risk country to a low-risk, absolutely you need a test on departure and perhaps another test on arrival to avoid exporting the virus and coexist with this. Now, if I can answer your question on the timeframes, I think 2 things are very important, and Thomas perhaps can comment on that. We have done a lot of surveys, and the travelers want to travel. And there are some groups, some demographic groups like the millennials and Generation Z and some Generation X, that they are okay traveling with the protocols that we have in place. But you know what they don't want? They don't want to be in a country that closed the borders. They don't want to be in quarantines. They don't want to be impacted. 70% of the travelers, for instance, as an example, in the US, they are ready to start planning as long as there are no quarantines, as long as they are not impacted. So from our view, the time frame is up to us. If we can learn from the past and have this international coordination, we can recover in 18 months. If we learn to coexist with the virus. If we cannot work together, and I'm talking about these international testing protocols and having the countries working together, it's going to take, as the Minister of Greece mentioned, and I think Bernadette also mentioned, 3 to 4 years. So the question is, what is it that we can do? Can we influence the future if we can work together or not? That is the difference, 18 months or up to 4 years, depending if we have an international coordination and international testing protocol or not.
All right. Thomas, you want to come in?
Well, let me say before I answer, probably during this call, I saw there some optimistic news on the newswire regarding the vaccine. And you could see share prices of touristic companies and airlines has raised significantly today. Probably we see really the first good messages from the scientific companies, from the medical companies. I'm sure we will see a better year than this year for the next year, and I agree completely with Gloria. We have to find a way, well, as long as we have not the vaccine, to create a framework, environment to live with the virus. And I only want to come back to Bernadette and to Harry. Looking in all these countries, in most of the countries, tourism is the highest contributor for the GDP, and it's so important for us that we not destroy the touristic infrastructure. I would say also in Jordan, when I was to wonderful Petra some years ago, it's unbelievable, and you should see it. And I think there are 2 arguments. One is the transfer of wealth from the northern part of Europe to other parts of the world is very important. This is by tourism, because in most of the countries, especially in middle and less income states, tourism contributes very high to the GDP. And when you look on the numbers of all tourism, well, the revenues of tourism, and compare the money given by states, so-called state aid, I remember 2015, the number of state aid was around $150 billion US, and money which came from travelers in less and middle income states was by 450 billion US dollars. This shows the significance of tourism for a lot of countries in the world. And let me point out also another issue. I say very often, tourism is much more than sun, beach, wonderful water and everything. It's also about intercultural dialogue. It's about learning. It's about going to Petra to learn about history, going to Greece to learn about, well, the roots of our democracy, going to other countries in the world. And as we are seeing a lot of nationalism in a number of states in the world, in the number of regions in the world, I can only encourage people travel more, because know the world, you will understand the world, and you will be probably more open, and it will be also a more diverse world for all of us.
Okay, so remember this session is about leading the way to recovery. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. The title of this panel is Leading the Way to Recovery, and you are all leaders. So less diagnosis perhaps, and a little bit more, concrete actions that you are taking, or where you feel that you're thwarted. I'm hearing very much that, Gloria's saying you've got to learn from the past. So I want to ask all of you, does past experience, to what extent does the SARS, Ebola crisis, 9/11 help us in this current crisis? Because I'm also hearing the minister in Jordan saying we need a vaccine, and yet we restored travel after SARS and Ebola without necessarily a vaccine there. So let's just unpick this. Who wants to pick that up? Theo Harris? Is the vaccine the silver bullet? And if it is, are people going to have to waive their vaccination certificate like you do with a yellow fever certificate when you go to various parts of Africa and say, I've been vaccinated, I'm safe? There's still a big question mark about how effective and how long-lasting vaccines are.
Well, there is always a question mark about the future, especially a future that's as unpredictable as in the current times. Well, I think there's no doubt in my mind that we will have some residue out of this crisis. So the same way that we have different security protocols at airports after 9/11, despite the fact that many years after that, we do not have an incident of that magnitude. I'm sure that with or without a vaccine, we will have some residue of health protocols, of different mode of operation, despite perhaps overcoming this kind of crisis. Now, the kind of protocols that will stay, nobody is sure about that. But we will not, I'm not saying we will not have masks or stuff like that, but we will have some kind of residue. The important thing is, as Gloria said, is to bridge the gap from now till the vaccine comes. So we don't know exactly when the vaccine will be available. We don't know the effectiveness, despite notwithstanding the good news that Thomas mentioned, the Pfizer news that we had today. We don't know the kind of programs in order to vaccinate the whole of the population. We've seen anti-vaccine movements, we've seen a lot of things. So it will take some time until this thing feeds through. What we need to do is A, bridge the gap, and B, ensure that on the way forward, we have the kind of protocols that keep this trust forever with our customers. We don't want to lose the trust of the customers again.
Okay, well, you've answered a question there which we got in, which is the vaccine will not cure all of tourism's problems. What global agreements can be made to make tourism resilient against future crises? I think you've kind of got that. Quite a few questions on sustainability in the sense of environmental, and a question here: with hardly any reuse and recycling, have environment initiatives in hospitality come to a standstill globally? We are going to touch on that a little bit in our second panel, but it may be that one of you wants to answer that question. Also, perhaps one for you, Minister in Jordan. What do you think about using technology to create digital copies of cultural and heritage sites to give access during this crisis? It's not actually going to get people into Jordan, but it may overcome the problem of, as you were saying, lack of travel means a lack of cultural awareness of other cultures and so on. Is that use of technology a reasonable one in your view as perhaps an interim measure?
Well, actually, Zena, we have started that. And it serves two purposes. It serves the purpose of getting people to Jordan without being physically here, and they can get some of our history and cultural places. And at the same time, they are getting excited to come as soon as they are able to arrive here. So I think it serves two purposes. I think it's something that we have done, and it has shown a lot of success. And I think we are trying to include more than the size that we have included so far. We're trying to expand this experience. But just to correct one more thing, tourism is resilient. And as my colleague Gloria and all my colleagues have said, we are not going to be waiting. We are going to be doing all we can to get tourism back to our countries as soon as possible. But we need to make sure that tourists are safe, and we need to make sure that they come and enjoy their stay. We don't want them to come and be locked down. We need them to come comfortable and live comfortable with a good experience from our countries. So I don't. When I say the vaccine is the answer, yes, it is the answer. But we're not going to be waiting until the vaccine is out. I mean, as I said at the beginning, we are starting to see what can we do to start bringing tourists back to Jordan as soon as possible.
All right. Okay, we're almost coming to the end of our time now. We've heard a great deal today about the kind of responses that the public sector is doing, and and also the private sector and what they welcome. We've heard about travel bubbles, air corridors. We've heard about the role that vaccines may play, getting a better coordinated test so that there isn't traveller confusion. But you all say that the appetite for travel is there, and I'm getting a lot of questions, kind of a variation on this theme, which is, what kind of travel global agreements can we take to mitigate this crisis and also future ones, and to build consumer confidence. More intervention and invention is out there, but it's not being adopted. This very key message of the lack of coordination and cooperation really across countries, across regions. What's your takeaway thought in how we can achieve this better? How can we tackle these immediate problems? So let me start with you, Gloria Guevara.
Well, as I say at the beginning, international coordination is key. I understand, because as you say before, I was a government official, that people, in these jobs, the ministers, their priority and heads of state was to protect their own citizens. But this world is very connected. We need to have agreements. Testing international protocol is key, so that we can travel between countries and have an agreement that what kind of testing, how do you measure? We need to bring some certainty and clarity to the industry. Even the way that we measure right now, the low, medium, or high exposure countries, or the green, red, and amber is different among the world. So we need to start coordinating, and perhaps that's bilateral, perhaps this is within Europe, and then within Asia, and within the Middle East, and then coordinate among themselves. But it is crucial for the government officials to have this international coordination and agreement to resume international travel, because we are part of this ecosystem. I know domestic is great and is good that is recovering, but it's not enough. If we don't have international travel back this year to a decent level, we're going to see, as I said before, 174 million jobs impacted by the end of this year, and a tremendous social crisis that's going to take us years to recover.
But leading the way to recover is the name of this panel, Gloria Guevara. So who is taking the lead? Should it be the public sector, the governments?
I think the public sector right now. We have the G20, as the Minister of Saudi took that challenge as one of the platforms. But for instance, the UK is coordinating with the US. Within Europe, the Minister of Greece mentioned that they are trying to coordinate between the EU as well. We just need to make this happen and move faster. And this coordination perhaps is bilaterals, is among the smaller groups, the Southeast Asia, the Minister of Philippines already mentioned. But we need to have these conversations. We need to sit on the table. The private sector is ready. Thomas mentioned that. We at WTTC say that. But we cannot do this alone. The private sector is totally aligned. We have a plan. 100 million jobs can be recovered very fast, as long as we have the leaders from the public sector bringing their health officials and working together to agree in these testing protocols and to learn to coexist with the virus.
You said, sorry to interrupt you, said bring 100 million jobs back very fast. How fast is very fast.
In less than 18 months, 12 months, 12 to 18 months, we can bring 100 million jobs back if we resume international travel in a health and safety way, working together.
You've answered a question there that we had, which was how long, and you're saying 18 months. Okay, Minister, your kind of closing remarks and thoughts on everything that you've heard, and particularly what Gloria Guevara has said, leading the way to recovery.
Yes, first of all, it must be important to encourage the international community to move towards global alignment by highlighting the end goal of reviving the travel industry, give back jobs. We have to have balance between health and safety, but at the same time, economics. And we believe that as long as minimum health and safety protocols are in place, as seen in the Philippines, that you can recover, you can restart the tourism industry. But of course, the sector, maybe, Gloria, we could start as maybe Southeast Asia or then Asia. We must have to adopt universal health and safety protocols, testing protocols, and all these protocols have to be in sync. But again, what is more important is that we can't just keep saying that we have to wait for a vaccine. In fact, we had a travel survey and 77% would like to travel even in the absence of a vaccine. And we've shown that we're doing now domestic tourism. People have been traveling, no COVID cases. So I think we can do our best practices here, maybe do it around Asia. I hope, Gloria, we can do it all over the world, but it's true that we have to have bilaterals with our partners in Southeast Asia, and eventually the whole world. Thank you.
All right, thanks. That's a very, very clear strategy there, Bernadette, that you're saying piecemeal approach. Take it region by region as a chunk. And Minister Naif Al-Fayaz, you heard Bernadette there say that don't just sit around waiting for the vaccine. There's a lot you can do in the meantime. You've been mentioning the vaccine a great deal. Do you want to temper what you said about the vaccine, having heard what your colleagues have said?
Actually, again, I said that we need the vaccine, but I never said that we're going to be waiting. I said we need to make sure that the protocol is there, but coordinated protocol. This is, if I can get out of all of the discussion, that means that we have to have a clear protocol. As Gloria said, when the global community worked together, they were able to put systems together throughout different crises that we have been through. And once we work together, the time frame is shorter than when we work separately. And I think this is one thing that we can come up with.
All right, and Minister, we've had a question which says, how does the international travel and tourism movement look like once the vaccine appears in one country or region over others? So we've heard a great deal in the press about, once you get the vaccine, we've heard a lot about vaccine nationalism, be it on a country basis or a region basis. And there are a lot of people working at Gavi in Geneva to try to make sure there's an equitable distribution of the vaccine. But what happens while you're waiting? If there are some that are ahead of the game in getting access to the vaccine over others, what's it going to look like? This question that is asking on the tourism movement.
Well, definitely. I mean, vaccine once it's out, let's say it's out at the beginning of the year, as they mentioned, it's going to take a while for everybody to be vaccinated if everyone is going to be vaccinated. But for example, this is the question: is how am I going to be aware of? Are we going to ask for the yellow passport for those who are vaccinated to come to our countries? I think we should not put these restrictions. We should put the protocols in place to make sure that we can guarantee for the people to come to our countries. And also at the same time, the country itself has to be also ready. So, for example, Jordan is very keen on having a lot of its population vaccinated, or at least priority for those who are in need of it, so that we can also make sure that the people who come to the country are also comfortable that they come into a country where it has been vaccinated. So when I mentioned the vaccine, I don't want to keep you stuck with the vaccine. Once we are stuck with something, we cannot move forward. I'm saying it is a solution that we need, and it is something that we have to work fast with the health organizations and wherever we want to make sure that we get it as soon as possible. But meanwhile, we need to work with what we have and have the necessary protocols in place to have our tourists coming back.
All right, thanks. Harry Theoharis, your closing remarks on leading the way to recovery. Your country has already received some praise from Thomas Ellerbeck earlier on that you're doing very exemplary practices which could set an example to others, but also perhaps in your closing remarks, just incorporate the idea that we tend to think of tourism and travel as air travel, and that's been very much underscoring this discussion. But obviously Greece, you know, the cruise travel industry and so on, it has its own slightly different set of issues. So perhaps just touch on that briefly in your closing remarks about just how we can build back better in a more resilient, sustainable way. Harry.
I mean, two thoughts I would like to leave you with, as well as what you specifically mentioned. Of course, we have specific sub-industries which have very, very different needs. The bad publicity that the cruising industry got with the diamond princess at the beginning of the crisis, the fear factor is much, much higher. But we've seen recently that the health protocols, which have been stricter in the cruise industry, have been implemented in such an exemplary way that we had no real problems, at least the experience that Greece had. Of course, one of the questions that you mentioned in passing was about the antigen test and their reliability. The experience that we had, doubling PCR with an antigen test, is a very, very positive one. So we would encourage other countries as well to look into that. We had very, very good experience. Now, two thoughts as a closing remark. One is that we should not just focus on the issues and the problems which have been dominating this discussion. We have to also feel good about the fact that we managed to reopen. 2020 was a year where, despite the crisis, we managed to find ways, we managed to implement protocols, train thousands and hundreds of thousands of people or millions of employees into those protocols, and a lot of countries managed to reopen. So this is the good thought of the day, if you like. And the other thought is the challenges that lie ahead. We mustn't lose focus from the fact that tourism is not the focus of countries. The health situation is. And the public and the politicians like me, we have to balance between restarting the industry and ensuring that people are not afraid, because we might open very quickly and see a backlash of the local population of being afraid of tourism, of being afraid of what's going on. So this balance is what's really required. And this is what makes discussions and coordination and cooperation more difficult, because countries like to keep control of the health situation in a nationalistic sense, if you like. So we will try to overcome that. We will be very proactive in ensuring that this cooperation is forthcoming. And our biggest ally in that has been the track record of this year. The cooperation between the industry and the public sector has been great. The travel and tourism industry is one of the best industries in terms of implementing those protocols. Our track record shows not many cases among employees of hotels, etc. Tourism has not been implicated in the spread of the disease. The second wave, at least, for example, in Greece, we didn't have the second wave in August when we had 1.5 million tourists. We have the brunt of it now in October with only a few thousand of tourists in Greece. So tourism is not to blame, is my message, for any second or third wave.
Thank you, Minister. Efkaristopoli, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thomas Ellerbeck, so it sounds like good coordination between the private and public sector, according to our panelists, but it seems like it's a problem of sentiment, emotion, fear that still has got to be overcome, and the perceptions of the virus and you know that tourism brings it, as Harry Theoharis was saying, isn't perhaps met out really in reality. So your closing remarks then in what can be done to overcome that, and whether you think more coordination is needed between the public and private sector, and how you can get better global coordination. All those three things to wrap up with. Thomas, thanks.
Sonia, I believe it's also about trust, because we have to talk about alignment and stronger coordination on the one hand. And on the other hand, I would see it's also the exchange of, well, best practice. And if you do this, probably it's important that governments and industry leaders in the industry sector trust each other. And also, again, looking on this year, as Harry said, it has been bad circumstances for all of us, but Greece and other countries have done a great job in this year, and we have had a strong exchange of best practice, and we started initiatives, and this is, I think, but it's very important. You mentioned the cruise business. We had our first cruise business in Germany and in Greece, and we started as a bubble. So we asked our guests to be tested before they leave Germany. They have been flown on one aircraft altogether. They have been on the ship. And from end of July to today, we had more than 40,000 cruise guests without any COVID case. And I think this shows when the protocol is in place, when both sides take their responsibility. And that's, I think, something we should underline. Harry mentioned this, governments feel responsible for the health of their people and the population. But on the other hand, also companies like us and our competitors feel responsible. That we feel responsible for the safety and the health of our customers. And therefore, I would ask everybody that we have probably more innovative tests, that we are looking for more exchange of best practice and the international coordination, as Gloria mentioned before. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much indeed, Thomas, Ellerbeck, Naifel, Fayaz, Harry, Theo, Harris, Bernadette, Romulo, Priat, and of course, Gloria Guevara. Thank you all so much for sharing those insights on leading the way to recovery. Thank you. And we're now going to transition to our next panel, which is looking at the fundamentals for long-term growth. So if we could move over to our next panel, and I will tell you very quickly who's on that panel. So it's Gustavo Seguro Sancho, who is the Minister of Tourism in Costa Rica. Nigel Huddleston here in the UK is a Minister in the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. We heard his boss earlier on there, Oliver Dowden. John Holland Kay from Heathrow, and James Thornton from Intrepid Travel, which is of course a travel and tourism group, and Inga Hoybrecht from the Radisson Hotel Group. So let us kick off with one to all of you, because you've heard a lot of what your what the previous panel has said, and you know, the fact is that we are seeing some positive action, you know, being taken by the public sector. We've seen a lot of support from governments, trillions of dollars being spent in recovery packages worldwide, and a lot of money has gone into the travel and tourism sector. So just give us an idea of what kind of government support or actions from the public sector have actually worked, and where you see specific gaps. Let's go to you first, Gustavo Seguro Sancho in Costa Rica.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's good to be with you in this panel. It's early in the morning here in Costa Rica, so good morning to all of you. In the case of Costa Rica, if I may very, very quickly show a slide. I think you're looking at my slide right now. There's one particular fact that has helped the tourism industry. It is that the government had a swift response to the pandemic, which allowed to delay the appearance of community spread of the disease by almost 5 months. So not only did that help strengthen the hospital capabilities in the country, but it gave the private sector enough time to prepare the protocols that, by the way, have received WTTC Safe Travels recognition. So that has worked very well as a tool to reopen safely. Then in terms of attracting the airlift routes, again, the government took the initiative to discount the jet fuel. That's very specific, I know, but it worked very well in terms of bringing back the specific airlift that we required. Of course, then we took a gradual approach to reopening, but this gradual approach for the past 3 months, despite the fact that it only meant about 10,000 international visitors, it allowed us to show that none of those 10,000 visitors acquired the virus while in Costa Rica. So that speaks very highly of the protocols, and now have enabled us to go towards a more dynamic reopening process. And then, just to be very quick, because I know there's a lot to be said by my colleagues in the panel. We've been reinforcing the positioning of Costa Rica as a sustainability sanctuary. This is not new. We chose this path of being a sustainable tourism model in the world, but now more than ever, it's time for us to reinforce and promote that positioning, because that's what travelers are going to be looking for right now. There's a couple of things that are being added to the laws in Costa Rica. We're proposing a bill to grant longer stay visas. In order to promote local domestic tourism, we've also launched a few initiatives. But in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to share with you.
That's very, very interesting. So you've taken some very, very clear steps there in Costa Rica to try to bring about recovery. Nigel Huddleston, the key thing there at the top that the minister from Costa Rica said there was swift response to the crisis. Do you think that you got it right in the UK? Because we know that it's something like 4 million jobs are dependent in the UK on the travel sector. Enough stimulus and staycations. We heard Oliver Dowden say people should holiday at home, and the Minister of Costa Rica has also said that. Do you think you're taking the right steps and that you took them in time?
Well, I certainly hope so. And of course, we were in an unprecedented situation. I know that word gets used a lot, but it's genuinely the case. And of course, back in March, April, none of us knew how long this was going to last. And I think that's very different from some of the other previous economic shocks that we've had. But, we are in a sector, the tourism sector, or the broader tourism, hospitality and leisure sector, which has shown itself to be incredibly resilient in the past. But we had these extraordinary circumstances where domestic, inbound and outbound was all hit at the same time, with millions of jobs in the UK alone dependent on it, as you said. So we introduced immediately quite a few schemes that were for the whole economy. The furloughing scheme, that wasn't unique to the UK. Many countries around the world introduced those kind of job support schemes. But we did bring in a whole series of measures that really helped target the particular acute situation in the tourism industry. So we had a cut VAT in tourism, which alone was £4 billion. Other innovations like the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, discounting trips for meals and so on. But I think, those innovations will continue as long as we need to continue to intervene. But I think there's really 3 steps to the process. One is keep those jobs where the demand has disappeared altogether or massively reduced. How can we sustain the jobs there, knowing and being confident they will come back? And I say the history of this sector shows that it will bounce back. Secondly, then, encouraging and enabling businesses to reopen. And that means working with the industry to make sure the guidance is in place so that customers can feel that those entities, those businesses that are open are safe. And I have to say, actually, around the world, I saw this really great measures being taken by the private sector in collaboration with the public sectors to try and build that confidence. And then any kind of marketing activities then related to that. Because that's the third bit, is making sure that when they can open, that they can open profitably. So that means looking at the cost base, helping with tax and other measures. And again, in the UK, we've had grants, we've had business rates relief, as well as changes to VAT. So there's a whole variety of levers that governments can pull, but we're still in incredibly uncertain times. So we are still at the point where we have to trial and test, see what's happening overseas, steal great ideas, cooperate, as Gloria has been a great advocate for that where possible. And of course, whilst the international travel has really struggled, to be honest, parts of the UK did okay on the domestic side this year. But we can't take that for granted. And international travel is vital for inbound tourism in the UK, for example. So, we can't divorce one segment from another. We all live or die together on this. And it's important that we pull as many levers as we can and support this vitally important sector.
All right, so John from Heathrow, you've taken a real hammering, haven't you, in this crisis at Heathrow. So when we look at fundamentals for long-term growth, you heard the minister there talk about, you know, domestic tourism is going to become more important, but he says obviously countries like Britain are going to rely a lot on inbound tourism. If we do see a rise in staycations, is that something that you're already factoring into your future plans?
Well, actually, we are expecting that international tourism will come back once people can travel. There's a massive pent-up demand to travel around the world. And of course, the UK is a great destination for inbound tourism. It's actually one of our best export sectors, is bringing people into the UK. And we need to make sure that we survive as an aviation sector over the next 18 to 24 months, when the market is going to be incredibly difficult, so that we can support not just the tourism sector, but all the other sectors of the UK economy that depend upon aviation as we come out of this. And I think there are some things the government has done very well. There are some opportunities to do better. And there are some things that, frankly, they just have not got right. And if I talk about the things they've done well, I think the adoption of a risk-based approach to opening borders is absolutely the right thing to do. And we've seen other countries following that lead with this red, amber, green traffic light system to denote whether countries are low risk and therefore there should be travel without quarantine, medium risk or high risk. I think the opportunity is to come up with a practical solution for countries which are high risk, which today is most countries around the world, so that people can still fly both for tourism and for business and for visiting friends and relatives. And that's where we need a common international standard of pre-departure testing, so that people are confident that no one getting on the plane has COVID, and that countries can be confident that by opening their borders, they're not bringing the risk of COVID into their markets. And I think that's something that I encourage the UK government to take a lead on, and to set up a pilot of this between London and New York, which is the busiest route in the world. But I think things that we can do better. There has been a staggering lack of support for the aviation sector in the UK in a way I have not seen in other countries around the world. We heard talk about business rates relief earlier. Well, we've seen that in some sectors, but not in aviation. And the only cost we've not been able to reduce in the airport is our business rates bill. And that's something that the government needs to do something about. We've also seen a lack of support for inbound tourism with changes to the VAT rules, which mean that from the 1st of January, tourists coming to the UK won't be able to get their VAT back on things that they buy in the UK or buy at the airport. That puts the UK at a competitive disadvantage at exactly the time when we should be looking to become more competitive. These are things that it's not too late to change, but the government needs to move quickly if we are to protect our inbound tourism sector and make sure that we're in a position to come out strongly from this global crisis.
Right, well, he's thrown the cat amongst the pigeons there, hasn't he, Nigel Huddleston, with John from Heathrow. Just a very quick response from you on that main point, which is that perhaps the British government could do more to support the aviation industry, the VAT and, you know, all the rest of it. Just a quick response on that. I mean, obviously you've had conversations, but, or the government in Heathrow, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like most governments around the world, actually, I wouldn't say the silver lining, but one of the positive things that's happened over the last few months is that there's been great dialogue between public sector and private sector, actually, a great understanding. And it doesn't surprise me what was just said there. I would say, look, we are looking at many of these things that we've initiated in the UK, this global travel task force, which will be reporting into the Prime Minister. And we'll be looking at some of the measures that have been identified, like the testing regime as well. Of course, we had travel corridors initiated earlier in the year, which helped some of the travel. And we're keeping a very close eye on what's happening in other countries and other parts around the world. But I have to say, I don't think any sector will get 100% of what they want. But certainly I don't blame the aviation sector for lobbying and putting those asks forward. And until we get global travel up and running again, some of those measures won't really have a huge amount of impact. But once we get global travel moving again, then we need to kind of double down and promote and support it as much as we can.
All right. Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to the perils for the aviation industry as we continue our conversation. But let me come to you, James Thornton, CEO of Intrepid Travel. I mean, obviously, you know, you, as the name says on the tin, have holidays that, you know, go to adventurous places, and you really try to kind of provide a window on the world of different cultures and exciting holidays and adventures. I mean, so in terms of how far you want to see assistance from the public sector to enable you to do what you're doing, are you having a good conversation and getting the kind of coordination and cooperation you would like to put down good fundamentals for your long-term vision?
Probably have quite a unique experience down here, Zainab. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. I'm English by birth, but living down in Australia, and right here, right now, our international borders are firmly shut. And so we certainly empathise with my friends and family and colleagues in the UK, but our borders are completely shut down here. And so the result is that we've managed that pandemic incredibly well down here. I think Australia this morning had 84 active cases in a country of 25 million people. But as Australians, we can't actually leave the country without the government's permission. So we're in a very unique scenario down here. You know, the country is essentially shut. You can't leave, you can't come in. I think there's 4,000 citizens can come in every single week. So it's very, very limited right here, right now. In terms of the impact to Intrepid, we're a global tour operator responsible for carrying nearly 500,000 passengers to over 130 countries around the world. So of course, it's absolutely devastating. The brutal reality is that travel is going to progressively return very local immediately. So from Intrepid's perspective, we're focused a lot on local and domestic tourism, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, where those borders are shut. And like we saw in the British and European summer, being able to travel locally in Europe where the corridors allowed. But it's undeniably the most challenging time to be a global tour operator right now.
Yeah, and I mean, you have said, James, haven't you, that travel is a privilege, not a right. And in the light of what you're saying now, you know, you are looking in the future to people engaging in what's being called slow tourism, so that people take fewer holidays, but maybe stay for a longer time, more perhaps experience and action orientated. So are you going to see a very clear shift, do you think, that's going to stay with us? That's a trend that's going to stick?
I hope so. I hope so, Zainab. I mean, you know, we are facing arguably one of the most challenging situations for the world in 20, 30, 40 years. And while COVID is absolutely devastating for the travel industry, ultimately climate change will be more devastating if we don't rebound responsibly. And I think, you know, we're at the moment, you heard in the previous panel that people are crying out for a vaccine to get people traveling again. Well, there is no vaccine for climate change. So, you know, if we don't rebound responsibly and we don't take this opportunity to respond with slow travel and more meaningful travel, then we face an even worse disaster potentially in 20 or 30 years' time, which I know seems incredible given the situation that we're currently going through now, but it's very, very real. So we have to rebound responsibly.
All right, we're going to come back to climate because I'm getting some questions on that already. But Inga, you're Global Senior Vice President for Responsible Business and Safety Security for the Radisson Hotel Group. So perhaps just respond to what your fellow panelists have said there, that one way or another, people are talking about the staycation, people sticking, you know, to the familiar, staying closer to home. So how is that going to reshape the hotel industry?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think what we need in this crisis and what we have all been demonstrating is flexibility and innovation. And we cannot wait for a vaccine. We had to react straight away. And I think that is one of the things that we have all been doing. And at Radisson, we have been doing this in various ways. We have, for example, launched our safety protocol, which is globally validated by SGS. We have started an innovation committee, and we have changed and started new concepts in service. New technology has been introduced and even a new brand. So we have to adapt, and domestic travel is not enough to save the tourism and travel industry, but it is a very good alternative, which we are seeing and which we can do safely now, thanks to the many protocols on safety and security we have put in place. But to react to what the fellow panelists have been saying, I think we can be very thankful. We have 95,000 team members in our system globally. So we are very thankful for the many support packages that have been put in place. We are a people's business, and these measures to support employability, working capital, and tax relief, they are working, and they have enabled us to retain comparably more team members because of them. I do think, though, that we need to build back responsibly, because the next big thing around the corner is climate change, as James was saying. And so recovery stimulus should be linked to sustainable investments and inclusive employment.
All right, let's go to Minister Seguro Sancho, because obviously Costa Rica, small country, about 5 million people, famed for its biodiversity, and you have got a lot of ecotourism. So, we're hearing, James said that there's no vaccine for climate change, and we're getting questions here from our audience who are saying, is there any hope that slower growth might be seen as a good thing to help tourism recalibrate given climate change? And, this issue of sustainability in terms of looking at, in terms of the environment is a recurring theme. So how far do you think this current crisis has a silver lining, in the sense that you can reset the button and rebuild in a more sustainable, environmentally friendly way? And
Right.
are you doing that in Costa Rica?
Right. No, I have a set of very, very specific examples of how we can do this. And I'm more than glad to share with you today a few of those ideas. And again, if you allow me to share my screen real quick. For instance, earlier this year, Costa Rica submitted a pioneering proposal to reduce deforestation through the use of technology. And space information generated by satellite imagery from this tool, Google Earth Engine, so we can monitor forest coverage. We recently launched a carbon footprint offset platform for visitors. So right now, visitors coming to Costa Rica can enter a website in which very quickly they can calculate their emissions and pay a small fee, 5-10 pounds. That's a voluntary fee that then goes into a fund that pays environmental services in local ecotourism, local sustainable agriculture farms here in Costa Rica. So your trip will be offset in terms of your carbon footprint. In general, Costa Rica has a model that has been being developed for over 30 years, in which tourism has really become a tool for social progress. And let me just mention what that really means. Costa Rica has a 26% of its territory in some form of protection, whether public or private land protection. And even though we're a small country, 50,000 square kilometers, we have 32 tourism regions. So visitors coming to our country really spread throughout the country and visit an average of 5 to 6 places in visits that last an average of 16 to 17 days. So when we talk about truly having tourism as a tool for development, we live that in Costa Rica. And to my last point, the Pura Vida pledge there, in the UK market, we recently launched a program to communicate the real meaning of responsible travel to all visitors. We call it the Pura Vida pledge. Pura Vida is a phrase that we use here in Costa Rica, to mean something positive. It really resembles our way of thinking, our way of living. I think we've taken wellness as a way of life here in Costa Rica. So right now, what we're focusing on is to really communicate that to the tourism industry, because it's not difficult for us. It's the way we live. So we're taking new dimensions of sustainability in our communication. It's important to the world to know that despite we've also been hit hard by the COVID cases, we only have 1.2% death rate among those who acquired the virus. And that's a result of a very sound health system in our country. And that's very important for the tourism industry to know. When it comes to making decisions on where to travel, this becomes an issue.
Well, you've got a wonderful, come and visit Costa Rica, basically, is what you're saying, 1.2%, death rate and all the rest of it. You've done very well there, but you are the Minister of Tourism for Costa Rica after all. But Nigel Huddleston, just picking up that idea of the Pura Vida and the sustainability and wellness, approach to tourism, we're also getting questions, in that regard from our audience, who this idea of sustainability is very because, so to what extent is this affecting your thinking? One question we're getting here is pre-COVID, it seemed the only aim of both governments and the private sector was to increase visitor numbers and gross revenue. So any change now, this question that he's asking, has there been a shift in mindset?
Yeah, well, I think underlying this is a hypothesis that you cannot be environmentally responsible and have economic growth. It's kind of like a choice. You've got to have one or the other. I don't believe that's the case. I think that's a false choice, actually. I think you can have economic growth and you can still be environmentally responsible. And actually, the tourism hospitality sector has done a pretty good job, actually, I would say, over the last few years at recognizing that. I mean, everything from aviation, recognizing it can have more environmentally friendly planes, to hotels and other organizations reducing waste and focusing on carbon reduction. And many companies have actually independently committed to be carbon neutral. So I think the responsibilities across, the entire sector, both on government and private sector, is recognized. But also, it's really important to recognize the contribution of tourism to sustaining our environment as well. I mean, some national parks around the world wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the money that was brought in through tourism. So we absolutely have to get the right balance here. But those suggesting that it's either, tourism or it's environmental protection, choose one. I don't buy into that. I mean, in the UK, it's a broader political debate, of course, as well. And I'm one of the politicians on this panel, so I won't go too much into this direction. But it's a valid political debate to discuss. But in the UK, we've had economic growth over the last 20 years, quite substantial, and massive reduction in carbon emissions, massive increase in recycling, massive reduction in plastic waste and usage. So, we can all be responsible citizens and responsible governments and a responsible tourism sector and make progress while creating economic growth and creating jobs. It is possible, but it takes a bit of effort.
Okay, well, Nigel Huddleston there, John Holland Kay, CEO of Heathrow, throwing the gauntlet to you, saying that the aviation industry could be more environmentally friendly and that, pressing the pause button like this may give you the chance to think about, more carbon friendly fuels and all the rest of it.
Well, I think that's right. And actually, just before the COVID crisis hit, the UK aviation sector was the first in the world to commit to net zero emissions by 2050. And this is significant because aviation has always been excluded from global climate change deals, and so has always been seen as being a bit of a exception, and became a poster child for environmentalists who saw aviation as the enemy. But aviation is not the enemy. Carbon is the enemy. And our job, if we are to have an aviation sector and the ability for people to travel in 30 or 40 years' time, is to protect the benefits of aviation in a world without carbon. And there are many things that we have to do to get there. That's about the planes, but the most fundamental change will be the fuel that powers the planes, moving from fossil fuels to sustainable aviation fuels, which are made either from waste or from synthetics, so combining captured carbon and hydrogen. And all the technology for that exists today. We just need to scale it up to a point that it can be a viable part of the solution. And there's no reason why 10% of all the fuels that power planes should not be from sustainable sources in 10 years' time, and 50 to 100% by 2030. By 2050. The gap really is the commitment from both the sector and from the energy companies to scale up production. And this is where we need help from government to set mandates that require a certain take-up of sustainable aviation fuels over time, which will send a signal to the producers to get on with it. And I think there are two big milestones here. One is COP26, where the UK government has an opportunity to showcase this as a solution to a global challenge. And the second is the ICAO General Assembly in September 2022, when we can have a global consensus on net zero emissions by 2050 for global aviation. That would be a really fantastic step forward. That would be the enabler for sustainable tourism around the world.
So, John, you asked for more help from the British government earlier on. We've seen in France, for instance, where President Macron has thrown around 20 billion euros to Air France. And given that bailout, but very much linked to progress on, Air France's environmental records. So is that a quid pro quo that the aviation industry here in the UK would accept? And unless you get that, are you saying that you cannot accelerate progress on having more carbon friendly forms of fuel?
Well, I think it's a perfectly reasonable request, but actually the kind of help that we need in the UK is very different to what was given in other countries, where, as you say, tens of billions of dollars have been put into supporting the aviation sector. We're not actually looking for that in the UK, but we should take comfort that BA, EasyJet, Virgin have all committed to net zero by 2050 and have helped to lead a coalition of the willing around the world that now includes airlines from the US and Russia and China, even the Middle East and Australia, committing to net zero by 2050. The desire to get there exists. What we need is government help to form a bridge between the supply side, the fuel companies, and the demand side, the airlines, to make sure that we're scaling up sustainable aviation fuels very quickly.
All right, going to come to you, Inga, and then James, because companies are coming, as we know, under increasing scrutiny for their environmental records, as well as inclusivity and diversity and so on. And we're getting quite a few questions on that theme, which bolster this. There is no vaccine for climate change. What will ministers do to support the sustainable development goals whilst recovering their business? So, this ethical dimension to recovery in the tourism and travel industry is clearly a very important one for our audience here. Another person said, talk versus action. Why aren't corporations implementing the 2015-17 Sustainable Development Goals into corporate accounts? And this will be music to your ears, Minister Gustavo Segura Sancho. Somebody asking here, what about collaboration and learning from others? Why don't ministers from other countries not partner with Costa Rica to learn and apply similar models of sustainable development? That your chart is doing its business with all those points that you're putting up.
Thank you.
Let's go to you, Inga and James, on that question of scrutiny of your environmental records. How are you dealing with that at Radisson, Inga?
Well, first of all, let me say that transparency about what we are doing on sustainability and inclusivity and social engagement is key. And we've had a long tradition of being very transparent about that over 20 years in our annual sustainability report. And even in the crisis, I must say that the crisis has brought out the best in people, because we have seen our teams and our hotels around the world being engaged in things like food donations, donations of discarded linen to create face masks for communities in need, housing for first line workers, etc., etc. So even in the height of the crisis, the responsible attitude and responsible actions have continued. And I must say that this hasn't taken us off track at Radisson from our ambitious sustainability targets. During the crisis, and actually this was in September, we have extended our 5-year plan strategic targets as a company, and we have issued the ambitious carbon reduction target of 30% carbon reduction in just 5 years, to be en route for full carbon neutrality by 2050. We maintain our commitments like 100% carbon neutral meetings and the phase out of single-use plastics. Although on that latter one, I know we get a lot of questions on single-use plastics, and at this time, during the height of the crisis, with all the PPE we see around the world, we know that the health and safety is a priority, of course, but we will come back to our commitment of phasing out single-use plastics in due time. And we are sticking to that. And we are focusing on the reduction of food waste with our food and beverage transformation. So the innovation we went through and we had to implement during this crisis will also lead to a stark reduction in food waste, for example. So I think we are even continuing our employability programs even now in this moment of crisis in Africa and other places. So good is still happening, transparency is key, and we're still on track with regards to our long-term targets.
All right, thanks. James, just put these couple of points in your head as you come back to the sustainability and environmental point we're discussing here. Somebody asked, along with the idea of tourism as a tool for sustainable development, is it also time to raise awareness about the power of tourism as a tool for, gosh, a lot of responsibility being laid at the door of tourism here. Sustainability is not just about climate change. Are there blind spots? What about race and gender? So again, this kind of inclusivity, diversity agenda, which is very important to a lot of customers. You know, we've heard a lot being debated on a global level about this equality, inclusivity and diversity agenda. So fire away, James.
Yeah, absolutely, Zainab. I mean, Intrepid's a certified B Corporation. So I think we're the largest certified travel B Corp in the world. We've joined the likes of Body Shop, Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, but really established companies who are looking to use business as a force for good. And businesses that are force for good, they talk about openness, honesty, transparency. And so we try and measure what we do. We acknowledge the things we don't do well, but we try and implement and make significant progress. And you know, a company like Intrepid, we've been carbon neutral since 2010, but we recognize that actually for a company like Intrepid, carbon neutrality isn't enough now. So we've just committed to science-based target initiatives to reduce our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. But I just want to pick up on a point Nigel said earlier, and I just fundamentally disagree with the concept that a business cannot be a commercially successful company and not be a force for good as well and make a material difference to the world. And Intrepid's proved that over the last 4 years. We've had record growth, double the size of our company, record profitability, but we've also become a certified travel B Corp, and we've done some incredible things in the purpose space, like science-based tourism initiatives, like doubling our number of female leaders, so taking steps in diversity, equity, and inclusion, our reconciliation action plan down here in Australia. So I actually believe that consumers want to buy from and employees want to work for companies that actually stand for something. And that together you can be a commercial success and actually be a purpose leader as well.
Very good. John, getting a question here, I'd like to move on to technology and innovation, because we've had one on technology here, which is, as the hospitality and travel industry, but let's put travel in as well, is the last to adopt the latest technology, not through for airports and all the rest of it. How can it gain the advantage other industries get through technology? Let's just adapt that question slightly to ask you about the importance of technology and innovation for the sector's recovery. I mean, you know, what are the trends that we can expect to see going forward? You know, touchless, non-contact technology at airports, all the rest of it. Is that going to help us recover better, more quickly from the COVID-19 pandemic problems?
Yes, I think it will, and it's going to accelerate the trend that we've been seeing for some time towards a contactless travel experience. So we had already started developing the airport of the future, where you use your face increasingly as your passport as you travel through an airport, so that rather than having to show your passport, your boarding pass time and time again, we have facial recognition systems that allow you to go where you need to go. And at the moment, we haven't quite made the full transition towards that, but I think we'll see that happening in the next few years. But the kind of things we've started to do much more quickly to get to a contactless system is to adapt the equipment we have today. So if you're checking in at Heathrow now and you don't want to touch the automatic check-in kiosk as you normally would, you can scan a QR code on your phone and you can go through the check-in process on your phone instead. And that's a clever way of adapting existing technology very quickly to suit a contactless world. But increasingly, we'll be moving to a new generation of technology. And that will include things like the next generation security scanners, which will allow you to keep your bags and your computers and your liquids all together. So it'll be a much quicker and better quality airport experience, while keeping you even more secure than you are today. So I think we're on the cusp of this revolution towards a more Minority Report type world, where where the technology will support you to have a seamless journey.
And do you think that timeline's been accelerated by the pandemic?
Very much. And I think there are two tensions here. One is that the pandemic means there's less money to go around to make that change happen, but there's more pull through from passengers. And that's why we're looking at clever ways of adapting the technology we currently have to a contactless world in the way that I've described with the QR codes. But we are investing in other technology, self-cleaning handrails, if you're going up an escalator, so that they're continually being cleaned using ultraviolet light, using the similar technology for a button in the lift, so that you can be confident that that it is self-cleaning. So there's a lot of innovation happening around the whole hygiene environment, as well as around the passenger journey and security.
All right. A question here for the ministers. You first, Nigel Huddleston. Considering the fiscal challenges now facing governments, and the aviation and travel industry, will the money still go into research and innovation?
Absolutely. I mean, those are still long-term goals, actually, not only government money, but actually, as we've just heard, the innovation going on in the private sector has been incredible. I mean, I would say in some ways, actually, over the last few months, we've seen certain sectors go through leaps and bounds. Certainly, you think of some of the tourism and leisure providers, they've adopted technology, whether it's booking contactless or showing visuals. I'm also heritage minister, as you can see me behind me. The use of video and online offerings to educate, inform people on heritage has been incredible over the last few months. And still, if you look at the government commitments for science and technology investment, it's still very high. Look, there's no doubt we're in very, very difficult financial times, but luckily we're in an era of relatively low interest rates as well. So government intervention is at a level that none of us really foresaw or would expect or even desire, but we can afford it at the moment, and we shouldn't let some of the really important investments like in technology and innovation and research at our universities suffer.
Minister Seguro Sancho.
Yeah, I agree with Minister Nigel. I mean, Costa Rica in particular is undergoing a fiscal crisis right now. So the way we're approaching this is we're going to target new market niches that Costa Rica didn't have before, so that we have some fresh, sources of revenue coming into the country. And I'm specifically talking about the digital nomads, the long stay traveler. And one thing that Costa Rica didn't do before, and is going to be doing now, is aggressively promoting the film production coming in as a form of foreign investment in Costa Rica. So with that, we're going to get fresh resources in order to keep working on especially our creative ways of bringing sustainability as a model to attract the right kind of traveler.
All right, Inga, let's ask you, because that question about the hospitality industry being the last to adopt the latest technology, how it can gain the advantage through greater use of technology and innovation.
Yeah, I admit, I think it's true. We, on one hand, we were always a very classical, people-oriented, contact industry where we interact with our guests and we thrive and we deliver good service by interacting with our guests. So I think this crisis has really accelerated quite a lot. So I've been talking about how we set up an innovation committee right from the start. We did that very early in the process, and it was actually spurred by this crisis to bring different departments together and to start analyzing at first all the cleaning and disinfection technology that was coming on the market. It was all from wizardry to really reliable things, and we picked some very reliable things for us, like transparent copper antivirucidal film that we put on a lot of items on top of the cleaning and disinfection we do, or UV disinfection boxes for smaller items like utensils for meeting and events, or key cards. Things like that have been accelerating quite a lot. And I think we will see this drive and this process continue. One of the big things, and I agree with the previous panel, we really see a lot of relief in these rapid antigen testing. So I would really call on all the governments to remove barriers to use these antigen tests also commercially. We see that this will be the future to create bigger and larger safety bubbles, which, for example, a whole event or even a whole hotel could become a safety bubble through this rapid antigen testing. So I think both on the medical side and the technological side, we've been spurred into action, and I think we will keep that action going.
All right. Let's now, in the final stages of this conversation, I'm keeping an eye on the questions coming in. A couple of questions, actually, just to incorporate whoever wants to in their closing remarks. Is racism and gender equality remain very much an issue? It's all really, the whole discussion is underscored by this very important point, which is resetting, recalibrating, rebuilding back better, using the advantage of this pause button that's been you know, pressed to really try and bring, you know, better fundamentals for long-term growth in the travel and tourism sector. So let's go to you first on that, James. And James, also your point here about the importance of conveying different cultures to your tourists and travelers in a very responsible manner. So it's not just the kind of, you know, them and us and looking at sort of, you know, exotic communities and all the rest of it. That feeds into this debate about, you know, race, really.
I think it does. Intrepid's built on the concept of trying to hopefully get people to change the way that they see the world. And we do that by taking you to over 100 countries in very small groups, meeting the local people, trying local food, staying in different types of local accommodation, and really trying to get under the skin of a destination and ultimately realize that, be it race, be it gender, be it religion, be it age, your background, fundamentally, we have more similarities than we actually have differences. And that by getting better appreciation of the world, that hopefully we can ultimately make the world a better place. And that might seem a little naive, but that's the fundamental base of what we're after. But to do that, you know, we have to get that more equal forms of representation in every aspect of the tourism industry. And sadly, it was an area that we weren't doing well enough pre-pandemic, and we have to take the opportunity to rebuild more responsibly in absolutely every area. And it's not just climate, it's not just trying to have more sustainable travel businesses, but it's every aspect in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion as well.
Okay, thank you. Inga from Radisson Group.
I actually, in relation to that and to building back better, I think there's an opportunity to work based on destinations and to start measuring tourism differently. It's not just about the number of international arrivals. It's not just about the dollars or the currency. It's really about how do we measure responsible tourism and tourism as a whole. There's a very excellent UNWTO initiative, which was started in 2016, which is the measuring of sustainable tourism. And I would really urge the whole tourism and travel industry and the destinations to start using this framework and to start resetting the paradigm and the conversation about tourism and travel in such a way. And if we then manage to distill from this very comprehensive framework just a simple way of communicating those positive impacts and this positive measurement for tourism to travelers and consumers, then I think we have the holy grail to really change that mindset and the paradigm of tourism and to build back better.
Thank you very much, Inga. John Holland-Kay, CEO of Heathrow, your closing remarks briefly, please.
Well, if I just pick up on that diversity and inclusion theme, and Heathrow is one of the most diverse places on the planet. If you think about the number of ethnicities and cultures and religions and ages coming through Heathrow, we have to be incredibly diverse to meet the needs of our customer base. And we're lucky to have around us as an airport an incredibly diverse local community with people from all over the world who come to settle around Heathrow, which is very often the first place that they arrive. And so what we're trying to do is to make sure that many of those people who come into work at the airport have an opportunity to develop their careers with us. So it's about long-term careers, not jobs. And we create an environment where a kid from a local school can come and do my job. And that will, by definition, create an incredibly diverse leadership team and a huge amount of social mobility, which will allow us to become a much better business, a much better airport serving the needs of our passengers. And we're making good progress on that. We now have our gender diversity in our management team up to about 40%, which is pretty good for a UK business, not to the 50% we want to get to yet. And we're up to about 20% in terms of ethnic diversity in our leadership team. Again, we want to get up to about 40%, which is more representative of our local communities, but we are definitely on a journey. And I think to the earlier point, business can be a force for good.
Thank you very much indeed. Minister Gustavo Segura Sancho, Minister of Tourism in Costa Rica. Have you got another chart that you're going to leave us with? You don't have to. No. So your closing remarks, please, about, you know, how this recalibration of the travel and tourism sector is going to allow us to put down better fundamentals for long-term growth in the future.
Yes, well, you know, among all the bad news, all the bad global news brought about by the COVID pandemic, I think the good news is these very valuable conversations are now dominating, you know, the way forward. So, you know, when you were talking about the questions about inclusiveness, that's also a dimension of sustainability, not just biodiversity and climate change, but really taking tourism as a tool for inclusiveness. It's a practical tool that is in our hand. Here in Costa Rica, we're very proud to say that tourism industry locally is probably the one that has the highest percentage of women entrepreneurs and women in management positions. And that's not a result of, you know, a specific program of this government. This has been, you know, worked about for the past 10 to 15 years. So truly, I can only agree with the sentiment that we've had this morning in this discussion, that tourism is a very handy tool for rapid results, not only in terms of environment conservation, but also inclusiveness and finally more equality in our societies.
Thank you. And Minister Nigel Huddleston, there's another aspect to inclusiveness, which of course the tourism market is has been at least a mass tourism market where, you know, you have relatively cheap holidays, so that travel isn't just the domain of those who are wealthy enough to afford, you know, exotic holidays or whatever. So that sense of inclusiveness, mass tourism, is that still a very important part of the fundamentals for the long term? And can you match that with sustainability and, you know, better attention to climate and environmental concerns and all the rest of it?
Yeah, well, ending on a big question there, but I know exactly where you're coming from, and I think actually the sector can be proud, actually, because not only do we bring, you know, huge economic benefit, but, you know, you think of our customers, we bring joy to millions and millions and millions of people every year who travel for a whole variety of reasons. And the sector does tend to skew young, tends to skew female, tends to be highly reliant on immigrant labour in nearly every country in which we operate as well, actually. And often that's seen as low-paid jobs. And as what John was saying, though, we need all to work together to make sure that the travel, hospitality, leisure sector is seen as a great place for long-term careers. And I say we've got some deep, big conversations to have about how we manage the environmental matters. But not only do we bring joy, though, I mean, let's not forget that the cultural significance has been alluded to by several other members on the panel here. You know, there's great cultural advantage to traveling abroad. I think it was President Lincoln said once, you know, I don't like that man, I need to get to know him better. And, you know, that's a great mantra for travel as well, isn't it? Because the more we travel, the more we get to know each other, the more we can work together and bring harmony. So, you know, we can all do a lot of work, have a lot of fun in the process. We've got a long way to recover. But this is a fantastic sector, fantastic industry. I've worked in it for nearly 35 years, and I'm absolutely confident we've got a bright future.
Yeah, I should have said, before politics, you worked in tourism and travel, so you know what you're talking about. Or at least we all hope you do. Yeah. Minister Nigel Huddleston, Minister Gustavo Segura Sancho, and also John Holland Kay, CEO of Heathrow, and James Thornton from Intrepid, and of course Inga Hoybrecht from Radisson Hotel Group. Thank you all so much indeed. I think your discussions on, you know, how important issues like the environment best practice and technology will play in reshaping the sector has really given us a great deal of thought. And indeed, in this Ministers' Summit at the WTM, I think both our panelists have thrown a great deal of light and really given a lot of guidance on topics that public opinion does really need some guidance on. We've heard a lot today: globally aligned travel restrictions, global health and safety protocols. We need continued government support. We need better coordination at the international level, smarter, seamless travel experience, and of course, as we've been hearing just now, greener travel and tourism industry with better inclusive and sustainable practices. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to everybody as much as I have. That's it for now. Thank you to all my guests and to you, our audience, for taking the time and sending your very stimulating questions in. It's goodbye from me, Zainab Badawi, on behalf